I watched the email notification pop up on my phone at 6:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, and something inside my chest just cracked. The subject line read, "Effective immediately, please meet with HR regarding your position." I had to read it 3 times before the words stopped swimming. My hands were actually shaking as I sat in the parking lot of Westfield Medical Clinic, watching the last employees trickle out through the glass doors. 15 years. 15 years I'd given to this place, and they were firing me by email. Worse, they were doing it in the most cowardly corporate way possible. But that wasn't even the real punch. The real thing that would eventually blow my entire world apart? The email came from Brandon Chen, the new operations manager. The same Brandon who, exactly 4 weeks ago, was just another fresh-faced consultant walking through our doors. Let me back up because you need to understand what life looked like before this all went sideways. My name's Michael Garrett. I'm 48 years old, and until that Tuesday email, I was the operations director at Westfield Medical Clinic in suburban Cleveland. Not some fancy private hospital in Manhattan, just a solid, mid-sized clinic where we handled everything from basic checkups to minor surgical procedures. Nothing glamorous, but it was stable. It was mine, in a way. I'd built that department from the ground up, hired most of my team personally, implemented systems that actually worked. My wife, Jennifer, was a dental hygienist at a practice across town. We had 2 kids. Emma was 16, finishing her junior year at Lakewood High, and Tyler was 12 and obsessed with soccer. Our house was a 1990s colonial on Maple Street. Nothing special, but we'd paid down the mortgage to where we could actually breathe a little. Our credit scores were solid, we had emergency savings, and honestly, life felt like it was finally clicking into place. That morning in late March, before everything imploded, I'd woken up at 5:30 a.m. like always. Jennifer was still asleep next to me, her dark hair spread across the pillow. I kissed her forehead, this habit I'd kept for 23 years, and headed downstairs to make coffee. The kitchen was quiet. The neighborhood was quiet. It was the kind of morning that feels like a promise, you know, like the day's going to be good. I got into the clinic by 7:15, parked in my reserved spot near the back entrance. The morning staff was just arriving, nurses, receptionists, the phlebotomist. Everyone greeted me the way they always did. "Morning, Mike." "Hey, boss." Nothing was different. Nothing was wrong. Dr. Richard Hoffman, the clinic's owner, had asked me to come to his office around 10. Nothing unusual about that. We had weekly check-ins. But when I walked in, there was someone else there. A young guy, maybe early 30s, wearing a crisp blue button-down and those expensive sneakers everyone was buying. He stood up and extended his hand. "Michael, this is Brandon Chen," Richard said, settling back into his leather chair. "He's a consultant from Meridian Business Solutions. We've brought him in to help us optimize our operations." I shook Brandon's hand. His grip was firm, almost aggressive. He smiled like he was doing me a favor by acknowledging my existence. "Michael, I've heard great things about your work here," Brandon said, sitting back down. "Really impressive what you've built." There it was, the compliment that wasn't really a compliment. The way his eyes moved over me, like I was a problem he'd been hired to solve. I felt something shift in my stomach, but I pushed it down. "Thanks," I said. "Happy to show you around, get you up to speed on our systems." "That'd be perfect," Brandon said. "I'm going to need full access to everything, all your processes, your team structure, your financials, the whole picture. Richard and I want to make sure we're running as lean and efficient as possible." I nodded, not seeing the trap yet, not even close. Over the next week, I spent hours with Brandon. I opened up our files, walked him through our budget allocations, introduced him to my team. I showed him how we'd streamlined patient flow, how we'd cut our administrative costs by 18% without compromising care, how our staff retention rates were the highest in the county. I was actually proud of the work. I wanted him to see it. Jennifer noticed I was stressed that first week. We were sitting on the back porch on a Friday evening, both of us nursing glasses of wine while the kids were inside doing homework. "You're wound tight," she said, her hand on my arm. "What's going on?" "Just some consultant the clinic brought in," I told her. "Efficiency review. Nothing to worry about." "You're a worrier, Michael. You always have been. But you're good at what you do. You know that, right? I kissed the top of her head. I know. But I didn't feel like I knew, not really. By the second week, Brandon had somehow become a permanent fixture. He was in meetings I wasn't invited to. I'd see him in the break room talking to my staff, asking questions about me. Not hostile questions, just observations. How long has Michael been here? Does he ever take time off? What's the mood like when he's away? That's when the first real chill went down my spine. I mentioned it to Richard in a casual way, tried to keep it light. Hey, is Brandon going to be here long term, or is this just a 4-week engagement? Richard looked up from his desk. He seemed uncomfortable. Actually, Michael, I wanted to talk to you about that. We've decided to keep Brandon on board as operations manager. We think fresh perspective is exactly what we need right now. I heard the words, but they weren't computing. Operations manager? Richard, I'm the operations director. That's my department. Yes, and that's the thing, Richard said, rubbing his face. Brandon sees some redundancy there. We want to streamline the management structure. You'd be transitioning into more of a specialist role, handling vendor relationships and compliance. It's still a good position. A good position. That was the line that told me everything. A demotion dressed up in corporate language. My title stripped away. My department handed over to a stranger. My authority given to someone who'd been here for 2 weeks. I didn't argue. I just nodded and left his office. That night, I told Jennifer. He's restructuring? She asked. That doesn't sound good. It's fine, I lied. Just a change. People change things. But it wasn't fine. And the next morning, when I walked in and saw Brandon sitting at a desk that had been moved into my office, I realized something was very wrong. He wasn't here to consult. He was here to replace me. I stared at that desk in my office for a long time before I actually moved. Brandon was at a meeting with Richard, so I had maybe 20 minutes alone. The desk was mahogany, something I'd bought myself 8 years ago when I'd finally felt secure enough in my position to invest in decent furniture. Now it held Brandon's laptop, his coffee cup, some expensive-looking thing from a place downtown, and a stack of folders with my department's name on them. I picked up one of the folders. Operations, current structure. Inside were organization charts, salary breakdowns, efficiency reports. All of it looked familiar because I'd created most of it. But there were notes in the margins. Brandon's handwriting, red pen, words like bloated, redundant, cost-heavy. My chest tightened. I put the folder back exactly where it was. The next 3 weeks were a slow-motion car crash. Brandon didn't fire anyone outright. That would have been clean, at least. Instead, he just made my life impossible. He'd call meetings without telling me. He'd make decisions about my department and inform me afterward. He'd compliment my work in front of other staff, then contradict every directive I gave. Michael had us tracking patient wait times manually, he said in a staff meeting, his voice smooth as honey. I've implemented a new digital system that should cut processing time by at least 30%, much more efficient. I'd spent 6 months designing that manual system because it gave us flexibility and caught problems that a purely algorithmic approach would miss. But I just sat there, watching my team nod like he'd invented fire. Jennifer could see it eating me alive. We were lying in bed one night. It was mid-April by then, maybe 2 weeks into the Brandon era, and she rolled over and just looked at me in the dark. "Talk to me," she said. "There's nothing to talk about." "Michael, you barely slept last night. You've lost weight. You're not yourself." I wanted to tell her everything. I wanted to say that I was being pushed out of my own department by a kid in expensive sneakers who'd been there for 3 weeks. That my boss had already decided I was expendable. That I could feel it coming, the email, the restructuring, maybe even the firing. But what good would that do? She'd worry. She'd lose sleep, too. "It's just a transition period," I told her. "New management style. Everyone has to adjust." She didn't believe me. I could see it in her eyes, but she also knew me well enough to know that pushing wouldn't help. She just pulled me closer and kissed my shoulder, and we lay there in the dark while I ran through scenarios in my head, like a man trapped in a maze, looking for an exit that didn't exist. Work became a theater of small humiliations. I'd walk into the break room and conversations would stop. Not maliciously, my team actually felt bad for me, but it was there, the sympathy, the awkwardness. I was the guy being replaced and everyone could sense it. One afternoon, I was reviewing files in my office when Ashley Rodriguez, one of my senior nurses, knocked on the door. She was nervous, fidgeting with her hands. "Hey, Mike, can I ask you something?" "Of course, come in." She closed the door behind her. That's when I knew it was serious. "Brandon asked me to basically report on your daily activities," she said quietly. "Like what time you arrive, who you talk to, whether you're making decisions without consulting him. He said it was standard management oversight." My stomach dropped. "What did you tell him?" "Nothing. I told him I didn't feel comfortable doing that, and he backed off." "But Mike," she looked genuinely upset. "I think he's building a case against you, like documentation to justify whatever he's planning." I thanked her for telling me, even though knowing made it worse. At least ignorance was a kind of mercy. That night, I did something I'd been avoiding. I started looking at my employment contract. I pulled it up from the files I kept in my desk at home, and I read through it line by line. My hands were shaking again. That seemed to be my baseline now. The contract was pretty standard. At-will employment, which meant either party could terminate without cause in Ohio. No severance clause. No protection against demotion. Absolutely nothing that would stop Richard from letting me go. Jennifer found me at the kitchen table at midnight, still reading. "What are you doing?" she asked, pulling on her robe. "Looking at my contract." She sat down slowly. "Michael, if they fire me, I get nothing. No severance, no notice period, nothing. Just gone." "They're not going to fire you." "How do you know that?" She didn't have an answer, because we both knew. We both felt it coming. The morning of April 28th started like any other morning, except it didn't. I woke up at 4:30 a.m. and couldn't fall back asleep. My mind was already at work, already bracing for impact. Jennifer was sleeping beside me, and I looked at her for a long time. 23 years, 2 kids, a house with a mortgage we could actually manage, a life that made sense. At 6:47 p.m. that same day, sitting in my car in the clinic parking lot, I got the email. And when I read it, I understood that everything, absolutely everything, was about to change. I sat in that parking lot for 45 minutes. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just sat there, gripping the steering wheel, trying to breathe through the feeling that my entire chest was collapsing inward. My phone buzzed. A text from Jennifer, running late picking up Tyler from practice. "Can you grab milk on the way home?" A normal question, a normal evening. While my world was ending, my wife was asking about milk. I drove home in a daze. I stopped at the grocery store, grabbed milk, grabbed some things we didn't need, just to extend the moment before I had to walk through the front door and become a man whose life had just fundamentally changed. When I got home, Emma was at the kitchen counter doing homework. Tyler was in the living room on the Xbox. Jennifer was in the shower. Everything was exactly as it should be. I put the milk in the fridge and sat down at the kitchen table. And I didn't tell anyone. Not that night, not the next morning. I went to work on Friday like nothing had happened, walked into my office while Brandon was somewhere else, and I just existed in the space that used to be mine. It wasn't until Saturday afternoon, when Jennifer and I were alone in the kitchen, that something inside me finally broke. "I got fired," I said. The words just fell out of my mouth. She froze. "What?" "Tuesday, I got an email. Brandon, that consultant, he's the new operations manager. They're restructuring me out. The email said effective immediately, which means I don't even have 2 weeks." Jennifer's face went pale. She sat down. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I didn't know how." She reached across the table and took my hand. Okay, we'll figure this out. We have savings. We can do what, Jennifer? I'm 48 years old. I've been at that clinic for 15 years. Who's going to hire me? And even if someone does, I'll be starting over. Less money, less seniority, less everything. You don't know that. but I did. I could see it clearly now. The rejection letters I'd receive, the interviews where I'd be overqualified and too old simultaneously, the slow drain of our savings as weeks turned into months, the credit score dropping, the mortgage becoming harder to pay, the house we'd worked so hard for slipping away. I was staring into the abyss, and the abyss was staring back. Jennifer squeezed my hand. "We'll call a lawyer. This seems wrong. There has to be something." "There's nothing. At-will employment. They don't need a reason." That's when my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer it, but something made me pick up. "Mr. Garrett?" A woman's voice, professional. "This is Linda Chen from Meridian Business Solutions. I'm Brandon Chen's supervisor. I'm calling because I've discovered some discrepancies in the transition process at Westfield Medical Clinic. Do you have a few minutes to talk?" My hand tightened on the phone. Jennifer was watching my face, trying to read what was happening. "Yeah," I said slowly. "Yeah, I have time." "Good, because I think you might want to know what your clinic owner hired my firm to actually do." Linda Chen's voice was measured but sharp, the kind of professional tone that masks something dangerous underneath. I put her on speaker so Jennifer could hear. Then I grabbed a pen and started writing notes on the notepad next to the kitchen sink. "What kind of discrepancies?" I asked carefully. "The kind that suggest your clinic owner may have been deceived about the purpose of our engagement," Linda said. "Mr. Chen, that's my employee Brandon, was hired to conduct what's called a workforce optimization study, standard consulting. But about a week ago, I discovered he'd been given additional verbal instructions that weren't in the contract. Instructions to document performance failures and build a termination case against a specific employee." My hand stopped moving. Jennifer's eyes went wide. "That employee would be you, Mr. Garrett." "Why would Richard want to do that?" I heard myself ask, even though I already knew. He wanted me gone without severance, without legal exposure, without anything. Just a clean exit dressed up as performance-based restructuring. "I don't know what Dr. Hoffman's personal motivations are," Linda said. "But what I do know is that my company doesn't operate that way. We have ethics, we have compliance standards, and what Brandon did, conducting a personal vendetta under the guise of a business engagement, that violates our code of conduct and potentially exposes Dr. Hoffman to liability." "Liability how?" Jennifer mouthed the words, but I shook my head. I didn't know yet. "I've reviewed the case myself," Linda continued. "I pulled Brandon's notes, his communications with Dr. Hoffman, the documentation he collected. And I can tell you unequivocally, there is no performance issue with your work. In fact, your department's metrics are exemplary. What Brandon was doing was manufacturing a narrative to justify a predetermined outcome." The kitchen tilted a little. I sat down. "What do you want from me?" I asked. "I want to make this right, and I think you deserve to know what was actually happening. More importantly, I think you should know that I've already contacted Dr. Hoffman and informed him that Meridian Business Solutions will be terminating our engagement effective immediately. I've also recommended, strongly, that he reconsider his recent personnel decisions." After we hung up, I sat with the phone in my hand. Jennifer was staring at me, waiting for me to explain what had just happened. "She's saying Richard set this up," I said slowly. "That Brandon was hired specifically to build a case against me, so Richard could fire me without severance." "Can he do that?" Apparently he was trying to, but Linda Chen wasn't done. The next morning, I got an email with an attachment, a formal letter from Meridian Business Solutions to Dr. Richard Hoffman, outlining the ethical violations, the manufactured documentation, and the recommendation for immediate remediation. The email also included a CC to me and a personal note from Linda. "Mr. Garrett, I've attached our formal notice. I've also taken the liberty of copying our legal counsel and our compliance officer. This situation reflects poorly on Meridian, and we take full responsibility for our employees' conduct. However, I believe you should know that I'm also prepared to serve as a witness should you decide to pursue legal action. What happened to you was wrong, LC." I read that email 4 times before I showed it to Jennifer. "You need a lawyer," she said immediately, "like today." I'd never hired a lawyer for anything more serious than reviewing our mortgage paperwork. I didn't know where to start. But Jennifer did. She called her sister in Columbus, who worked in HR, and got a referral for an employment attorney named Marcus Webb. I got an appointment for the following Tuesday. Marcus's office was in a modest building downtown, 3rd floor, with a view of the parking garage. He was in his 50s, black, with reading glasses on a chain, and the kind of calm demeanor that made me feel slightly less like I was falling apart. I laid everything out: the timeline, the consulting engagement, Brandon's sudden arrival, the demotion, the email termination, and now Linda's revelation. Marcus listened without interrupting. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and tapped his pen against his desk. "You have a case," he said flatly. "Not a slam dunk, but a solid case. The termination itself is legal under Ohio's at-will employment doctrine. But the method, using a third-party consultant to manufacture documentation for a predetermined firing, that's potentially tortious interference and fraudulent conduct. Especially if we can prove Richard's intent." "What does that mean in actual dollars?" I asked. "Depends on what we can prove. Your back pay from the termination date forward, that's guaranteed. Lost benefits, emotional distress, potentially punitive damages if we can show intentional misconduct. I'd estimate somewhere in the range of $60,000 to $80,000, possibly more if we can prove damages to your reputation that affected future employment." $60,000 to $80,000. It wasn't going to rebuild my career, but it would buy me time. It would keep the house. It would keep us afloat while I figured out what came next. "What do I need to do?" I asked. "First, I'm sending a demand letter to Dr. Hoffman, laying out the case, explaining the legal exposure, and offering him the opportunity to settle before we file suit. Most doctors prefer to settle. The publicity of litigation is devastating for medical professionals." The demand letter was a masterpiece of controlled fury. Marcus outlined every violation, cited every piece of evidence, and made it clear that Richard's only intelligent move was to pay up and make this go away quietly. Richard's response came 4 days later through his own attorney, a corporate defense lawyer named Patricia Morrison. The letter was defensive and hostile. It claimed that Brandon's engagement was purely routine, that my termination was based on legitimate business restructuring, and that any suggestion of intentional misconduct was without merit and defamatory. But here's the thing about people who are actually confident they're in the right. They don't usually hire expensive defense lawyers. They don't threaten countersuits. They don't circle the wagons quite so visibly. Marcus read Patricia's letter and smiled, actually smiled. "He's scared," Marcus said. "If he thought he had a real defense, he wouldn't be posturing like this. He's testing to see if you'll back down." "What happens if I don't?" "Then we file. And then we depose Brandon, Linda, all of Richard's staff, everyone. And Richard will have to explain, under oath, why he hired a consultant specifically to build a termination case against a high-performing employee." The thought of Brandon sitting across from Marcus in a deposition room, under oath, being asked to explain his notes and his communications with Richard, that was something. That was actual leverage. Marcus filed the lawsuit on May 15th. I was served the same day. It felt surreal, holding the actual papers, seeing my name and Richard's name in legal language, understanding that we were now formally, legally, adversarially opposed. The next morning, I got a call from Richard. His voice sounded different, smaller somehow. "Michael, I think we should talk," he said. "Through our lawyers," I told him. "I'd prefer to handle this directly." "I'm sure you would." He was quiet for a moment. "Can we meet, just the two of us? I think I owe you an explanation." I wanted to say no. I wanted to tell him that anything he had to say should go through Marcus, but there was something in his voice, not quite desperation, but close, that made me curious. We met at a coffee shop on the west side of Cleveland, neutral territory. Richard looked like he'd aged 10 years since I'd last seen him in person. His hands were shaking when he picked up his coffee. "I didn't hire Brandon to build a case against you," he said without preamble. "That's not how it started." How did it start? I asked. Patricia, my ex-wife, she got remarried last year to someone younger, richer, better positioned than me, and I started feeling obsolete, like I'd built this clinic, put 20 years into it, and I was still stuck while everyone else moved forward. I wanted to modernize, to prove I could adapt, to show the world I wasn't some dinosaur. He wrapped his hands around the coffee cup like it was the only thing keeping him grounded. Brandon came in with all these ideas about efficiency, about cutting costs, about being lean and aggressive, and I bought into it. I thought he was going to make me look good, make me feel like I was still in control of something. But then, Richard's voice cracked. Then he started suggesting that you were the problem, that your department was bloated, that you were resistant to change, that we needed fresh blood, and I was stupid enough to listen. I didn't say anything. I just waited. When I realized what he was actually doing, when Linda called and explained the ethical violations, I felt sick, truly sick, because I'd let myself become the kind of person who would do that to someone who'd given 15 years to my practice. Richard looked up at me. His eyes were red-rimmed. I'm sorry, Michael. I know that doesn't fix anything. I know it doesn't give you back your job or your dignity. But I want you to know that it wasn't because of your work. It was because of my own insecurity, and that's on me. I wanted to feel satisfied by this. I wanted to feel vindicated, but mostly I just felt tired. What are you going to do? I asked. I'm going to offer you a settlement, a significant one, and I'm going to ask Patricia, my lawyer, to work with Marcus to make it happen quickly, without prolonging this. You shouldn't have to go through litigation because I had a midlife crisis. The settlement offer came through Marcus 2 days later, $85,000, full back pay from the termination date through the end of the year, restoration of my health insurance through December, and a written acknowledgement that my termination was not performance-based, which would help with future employment. I read the numbers 3 times. $85,000. It wasn't justice, not really. Justice would have been keeping my job, keeping my dignity, not having to spend weeks in legal limbo, wondering if my world was actually ending. But it was something. It was enough. I signed the settlement agreement on May 28th, exactly 1 month after the email that started this whole nightmare. That night, Jennifer and I sat on the back porch with a bottle of wine we'd been saving for something good. The sun was going down, painting the sky orange and pink, and I felt something loosen in my chest for the first time in weeks. What now? Jennifer asked, her hand in mine. Now I figure out what comes next. New job, new direction. Something better than what I had, hopefully. You will, she said, because you're good, Michael. You're really good. And you don't need Richard Hoffman to tell you that. Within 2 months, I'd landed a position as operations director at a larger medical group in Columbus. Better pay, better benefits, better trajectory. The kind of job I probably would have found eventually anyway, but that Linda Chen's call had accelerated by about a year. Brandon Chen was terminated from Meridian Business Solutions. I never found out exactly what happened, but Linda sent me an email letting me know that the company had conducted a full internal review and that Brandon's employment had been terminated for ethical violations. His career in consulting was effectively over. Richard Hoffman sold the Westfield Clinic to a larger healthcare network 6 months later. I heard through the grapevine that he took a significant loss on the sale and that he'd moved to Arizona to start over. Sometimes people's consequences are just about losing the thing they thought defined them. As for me, I'm writing this from my new office in Columbus on a Tuesday morning. Emma graduated high school last year and got into OSU. Tyler's soccer team made it to regionals. Jennifer and I finally took that trip to the Outer Banks we've been talking about for years. The lesson I learned, and I mean really learned, in my bones, is that people will sometimes reveal themselves through their cruelty, in ways they never could through their kindness. Richard showed me who he was. Brandon showed me who he was, and I got to choose what I did with that information. Not everyone gets that choice, but when you do, you have to take it.